Okay, welcome back. This is the 7th video lecture, I believe, on infancy and toddler, and we're going to carry on the topic of social and emotional development, specifically talking about emotions. Okay, so I believe we left off somewhere in here. I had just offered some reference to some of the earlier indication of emotions in the first 6 to 8 months: fear, sadness, and anger. Just as sort of a point of reference, the classic emotional researchers have argued that there are 6 basic emotions, sometimes 7, but most of the time you'll see it referred to as the 6 basic emotions. Let me see if I can rattle them off the top of my head. Fear, anger, sadness, surprise, disgust, and oh my goodness, and anger, sadness, surprise, disgust, happiness. Happiness. I always forget happiness. I wonder what that says. So these are what we consider the 6 basic emotions, and these are what we would, basic, so the primary emotions. And then if you ever see the big emotional wheel, I stole one from a therapist's office many years ago, and all of the other sort of emotional labels that we have are all considered to be examples or anchors in those basic emotions. So like guilt, right? Guilt is, I think it comes from sadness. Or jealousy. I think jealousy comes from anger. But the idea is that there's these 6 universal basic emotions. And then you can sort of break some of those down. Then we have a group of what we would call self-conscious emotions, and these develop later in development. So the basic ones develop first, obviously, and then for children, then the self-conscious emotions come later on. But in order to have a self-conscious emotion, you have to have self-awareness. So an example of self-conscious and cultural expectations. So like pride and shame. Pride and shame are emotions that are about I did something, but in order for you to experience pride that you did something, you have to know the I, you have to know you have to understand the concept of the self, and you also have to understand the concept of you did something good by cultural standards, right? Guilt is another one of those. Guilt is, in some references, they call guilt not only a self-conscious, but also a culturally engaging emotion, because typically or often when we experience this guilt, which is a negative emotion, and it's based on I've done something, that people will turn towards the group, right? So some culture, so guilt can actually cause a person to turn towards others. Embarrassment is probably a kind of shame, but it also implies that I am separate from you, and I have done something in violation to the cultural norm. So these are more sophisticated emotions that we don't see really, really early on. You have to have experienced some sense of self-awareness. So how do we know if a child has self-awareness, and when does this happen? Researchers put the time period about 15 to 24 months. There's a classic example, classic experiment that I will make available for you to learn about, called the Rouge test of self-awareness. This child right here is sort of demonstrating self-awareness. And so the way the experiment goes is that without the kid knowing, you put some marker on their forehead. Like in the experiment, it's literally a rouge on their forehead. And then when a child sees themselves in the mirror, if they touch it, it's an indication of self-awareness, because that means that not only do they know that person in the mirror is them, is the self, but they also know that this thing on their forehead is not supposed to be on their forehead. Children prior to the stage of emotional development in some of the experiments, they literally look behind the mirror. They don't know that face in the mirror is them, right? They see a child, but they don't know that child is them. So the point is that they have to have self-awareness, which is the realization that they are somehow separate from somebody else. Then you have a couple other concepts that are referenced here. One is social referencing. And social referencing is part of the social and emotional development, where children figure out how they're supposed to feel or how they're supposed to respond based on the look around. Like, if mom's scared, then I'm supposed to be scared, right? And parents are like intuitively aware of this, because they know that they will try to keep their emotional expression under control because they don't want to frighten their children. right? So that's the fancy term for that is social referencing, that they're looking for cues as to how I'm supposed to react, how I'm supposed to feel, what emotions are appropriate. So in this way, parents are molding and teaching about emotional expression. Then you have the next term on here, which is emotional self-regulation, which is an even more sophisticated element of social and emotional development, because not only am I aware that I have emotions, but now I am also aware that the others in my culture, I'm supposed to that I learn how to control how I respond to them, emotional self-reliance. So that means I'm aware of culture and I'm aware of self, and I'm aware that there are rules. Okay, let's move on to another topic. This is another really, really important, like I said, this is my jam, man. This is another really important concept in child development. Actually, this concept is important throughout the whole life course. The idea of attachment is the ability, or the attachment is one's ability to trust or bond, or the bond. I just read the textbook. The bond with a caregiver that infants derive a sense of security. But it's way more than that. One's attachment style, one's ability to bond to another person, and the theory is that this begins in infancy. That if a child learns to bond with their caregiver, they learn to trust their caregiver, that this ability to trust, it's not the trust with the caregiver, but it's the ability to trust, will translate for the rest of their life. If they learn to trust their caregiver early on, that people are trustworthy and good, the idea is in the future, they will continue to trust people, right? So, and you could get into attachment disorder literature, or what's kind of pop culture right now is the idea of anxious attachment, which is all based on, my daughter says she's anxious attached. I probably have some anxious attachment too, but it's all based on this basic developmental principle that my bond with somebody else results in my sense of security with people. Yes, with people, right? So attachment is critical. We'll probably talk about that later on. But there's been different conceptualizations of what attachment looks like. Not what it looks like, but what it's based on. So you have the Freud's theory of attachment, the psychoanalytical. Remember, he's about sex and pleasure. And from this model, attachment is the bond you have with somebody that makes you feel good, right? You have Harlow, and this image over here is a classic research on Harlow and his monkeys. And the way the research, the experiment worked was they took these monkeys away from their mother, and they have a wire monkey that only has food, and then they have a soft terry cloth monkey over here, and the terry cloth monkey doesn't have any food. And then they frightened the monkeys. And what they found was, as you might guess, when the monkeys were afraid, they didn't go to the food monkey. They didn't go to the bottle monkey, the wire one. They went to the monkey that gave them contact comfort. So Harlow's contribution to the literature is that it's not that babies need more than food. Food is not enough. Calories is not enough. That they must have contact comfort and a sense of security for children, for babies to grow up to be to maximize well-being. We have to have physical contact comfort, and it was critical research. At different points in world history where there have been wars, babies, I think, were put into orphanages and just big rooms with babies in cages, babies in cribs, and bottles. And it demonstrated that bottles are not enough. Babies have to be held. Then you have a third one that I have not seen this in other textbooks. This guy Bowlby's theory, and what he describes is attachment is the providing of the safe base. So what I think I'll put in this module is some illustrations, some video illustrations of what is meant by what attachment looks like in the lab. And what it looks like is the securely attached child is the one. So the experiment goes like this. I think it's called the stranger situation, probably in the next slide. The stranger situation. Child and parent are in a room, and child is playing with the toys periodically, comes over and says something to the parent playing with the toys. And a stranger comes in the room, child comes over, interacts with the parent, goes back to the toys. The parent leaves the room. Right now, the child is left with the stranger. The child gets a little upset by this, doesn't like the fact that their parent is gone, maybe fusses a little bit, maybe cries, maybe stops playing. But when then the parent comes back in the room and the stranger leaves. Parent comes back in the room, child goes to the parent, is comforted, parent hugs them, comforts them a little bit, then the child gets down and goes back and plays with the toys. That's what a secure attachment looks like. The idea, or at least based on this theory, the idea is that the parent provides the safe space. The insecure attached child is one that when the parent comes back, they don't calm down, right? The parent comes back and maybe the child doesn't even come over to them. Now, the stranger comes in the room, the parent leaves, they cry, they cry, they cry, they cry. Parent comes back, they continue to cry. Like they cannot calm down because the adult does not provide the safe and the secure space. There's even another level of this, is what we call the disorganized attachment. And not only does the child not calm down when the baby comes in the room, but the kid is even more out of control. And maybe they'll even be angry at their parent and wail on them. And the idea, the reason we consider this not attached is because the parent, it does not provide the safe space. This theory goes on to argue that there are two things that are needed for attachment: that the parent must be responsive, right? They must be responsive, because this is how the kid learns to trust. The kid learns to trust by, oh, they cry, they have a need, the adult comes. The adult is responsive to the child's needs, right? But not only is the adult responsive to the child's needs, but it's mutually enjoyable. So going back to a couple previous slides where we were talking about goodness of fit and we were talking about temperament, if your child is easy to calm down, then when they fuss and you come to them, it feels really good. It feels really good to oh, this baby is upset, and if I pick them up, they stop crying and they look at me. That's going to make me feel good, and I'm going to be totally cool with calming them down. If, on the other hand, my baby fusses and when I come and I try to calm them down, they don't calm down, that's going to cause me frustration, and I'm not going to look forward to this very much, right? So these things go together. The ability to attach, a child's temperament, a parent's personality, right? A parent's ability to respond to their child's needs. There's an interaction with these two things. So it is easier to attach if the interaction with the caregiver is enjoyable. On the other hand, if the caregiver comes back and causes you more pain, you're not going to trust the caregiver, right? If the caregiver, responds to your needs, but they respond to your needs by crying, by, I don't know, hurting you or insulting you, you're not going to really bond to them either, because really attachment goes both ways. Parents attach to their children and children attach to their parent. So attachment. And then you can get enmeshed. Well, we'll talk about that later on. Okay, so the last idea on this slide then is going back to a couple chapters back when we were talking about different theories, and one of the theorists was Erikson, and Erikson talked about the different stages of development. We're still in that first stage of development, and that first stage is trust versus mistrust. So using Erikson's model, the goal of infancy, or the crisis, we call it the crisis of infancy, is to establish trust. And this bond, this attachment, if we establish it or not, will follow us through, will carry us through the rest of our emotional and social development. Okay, I'm going to stop right here. Thanks to you for listening.